And both, let's see, allow to record, and allow to record. So, and Veronica and On, you're now able to record, and here comes everybody. So we're good. David?
Ready to go?
Yeah, everybody's in.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for your participation with this ongoing course with subjective influences through the 10 seed groups. Today is part 2 of a discussion on seed group 5, the political organizers. Last month, I did part 1, and that's available on the Makara website. Brief recap of the themes from January's talk. I discussed the nature of the will energy, the energy of will, and how it's connected with this seed group, and the difference between a leader and a statesman. If you missed last month's talk, like I said, it's available on makara.us. Today, I'm going to be talking about other various topics related to the political organizers group, such as the path to international consciousness, the need for vision from members of this group, addressing the problems of humanity, the nature of spiritual tension, and the upcoming 2025 conclave and what it could portend for humanity. The path to international consciousness. From the inception of the idea of the 10 seed or service groups, GK tells us that hierarchy and the ashrams sought to establish and develop international consciousness. Let me move this here real quick. There we go. They set to develop the international consciousness in the minds of the everyday man. This level of awareness is showing that all nations who are engaging through a political, economic, educational, cultural, and scientific sharing, they're generating a vital and energetic interplay. By developing and establishing an attitude of international interdependence and interrelation, that nations would, over time, will understand that a policy of isolation and separativeness must cease, and is not in the best interest of the world. It is the notion that in order to thrive, we must work together. The challenge in accepting this idea and vision has rested squarely on nations that are limiting themselves through national egotism, pride, and racial hatreds. This would describe countries like North Korea, Russia, and Syria, and perhaps even China, who, because of their tensions with their neighbors and the world, have isolated themselves from these type of intercultural exchanges. Members of the political organizers group are mindful that their work should strive to make mankind aware that it is collectively part of one humanity, irrespective of nation, race, color, language, or stage of evolutionary path. They can do this by promoting a spirit of international interdependence, interrelation, and cooperation. The United Nations is a demonstration of this possibility and underlying spirit aiming at synthesis. This is a stepping stone toward creating an attitude of awareness to help offset political rivalries and nationalism. Members of this group must employ the intuition to help define the path towards a brotherhood of nations based on common need and support. The end result will be a creation of a general movement towards better human relations and greater synthesis between all members. On a subtle note, they also acknowledge our shared past and history can be considered like a birth pang of a mental orientation and awareness, and that we are moving toward becoming unified rather than the norm of reactivity we are currently living with, such as with countries in the Middle East, Russia, and China. Common misconception is the belief that if we have a realization of one humanity, it sacrifices national identity. Political organizers hold that any differences of language, culture, or national identity should remain, as these will contribute and enhance the beauty of the diversity created by the many groups within humanity. Larger aspiration holds that these groups should work free from interference and continue economic and cultural sharing, and work in close collaboration and maintain right relationships free from pride, greed, ambition, and functioning with goodwill. Any tendencies toward nationalism, racial superiority, and antagonism should be negated and transcended. Since the 1950s, cultural, scientific, business, and education exchanges known as citizen diplomacy have occurred and enhanced the countries involved. For example, in 1956, Van Cliburn, the American pianist, went to Moscow at the height of the Cold War for an international music competition. Representing the United States, he was a citizen diplomat. He ended up winning the competition and was recognized internationally, not only as a great pianist, but for bridging a tense political and cultural gap that existed between the US and Soviet governments, a role that governments could not fill. In the last 60, 70 years, there's been a sharing of science, medical knowledge, business practices, educational initiatives, the arts, literature, music, and philosophy by millions of citizen exchanges between the United States, Europe, and Asia. Looking at the larger picture since World War II, most nations have realized the severe consequence of war and destruction and its long-lasting effects on their nation and the world of nations. Through their acquired wisdom, the majority of nations consequently have made efforts towards establishing international unity and partnership through economic, political, and cultural sharing. In this way, the long-term plan of the Manu is slowly becoming more of a reality. This level of sharing promotes goodwill, cooperation, breaks down racial and ethnic barriers, and expands people's understanding of each other at the non-governmental level. Through intercultural communication or citizen diplomacy, service workers are working to put forth a positive future and inspire hope for the future. And through their actions, they're holding the mindset that all problems can be worked out. And of course, as I say this, that the world, I should say, Ukraine is on the verge of being invaded by Russia. Maybe they won't do it. We don't know. So we're just hopeful that a higher level of understanding can come forth and wisdom. A new vision for humanity, a speculation. Last month, I talked about the need for visionary leaders or statesmen to come forward and provide guidance. A new vision for humanity is really a new story that would be collectively written from all urges for all humanity. The historic and current story is filled with conflict and lacking direction or unified purpose. The hierarchy has a clear idea about how the plan in civilization looks like when all the 10 or seed service groups are vital and functioning in the Aquarian age, with right human relations at their core. They hold this as an ideal at the ashramic level. In considering the vitriol, the levels of selfishness and separation which currently dominates the world news, humanity needs to hear a new and invocative ideas for giving hope and a new direction for civilization. A world unifying vision would embrace all peoples from all nations and cultures, Over the last 2 centuries, scholars, visionaries, and statesmen have put forth many utopian ideas and idealistic forms of government, but virtually all of them have been impractical and do not last for the long term. The 10 seed or service groups are spiritually oriented at their core at the ashramic level. That is, with soul guidance and motivation. Each seed group contains a kernel of possibility and potential for world transformation. At the website Center for Evolutionary Leadership, it provides a great description of what a new story could look like. They say, moving human evolution toward just, democratic, sustainable, flourishing organizations and institutions and societies is within our choice, and it can be produced by effective leaders, evolutionary leaders, their organizations, and citizens of all levels of society, cultivating solidarity and working collaboratively for a common purpose. Considering the whole spectrum of religious, economic, and political factions, it's not just hate, selfishness, separatism, and narrow-mindedness that drive many people with their actions. If mankind wants a world based on right human relations, then mankind must learn that ideas, thoughts, and feelings do influence the inner and the outer planes. These energies, therefore, must be reined in and guided through right application of spiritual values. Spiritual values here is cooperation, understanding, and goodwill. Man must realize that although he practices separativeness in so many ways, he can transcend these and realize his interconnectedness and oneness with all whom he interacts. With the human drama of life happening across all the seed groups, we have no one who can make sense and offer solutions other than band-aid mentality or temporary fix. We need people who can see the global situation whole and not any separate part that favors an individual person, group, company, organization, or nation. While I will not presume to understand what the masters think and know, I would like to at least examine some ideas of what could possibly be behind a new vision for humanity. We might ask, what would a new vision look like if elements of the plan were implemented? And paraphrasing from Externalization of the Hierarchy, DK says, a new world order or vision must be appropriate to a world which has passed through a destructive crisis and to a humanity which is badly shattered by the experience. It must lay the foundation for a future world order which will be possible only after time of recovery, of reconstruction, and of rebuilding. The world order will be founded on the recognition that all people are equal in origin, goal, and that no group has power over another. Governing bodies of any nation should be composed of those who work for the greatest good and greatest number at the same time, offering opportunity for all. The world order, the new world order, will recognize that the natural resources, that is, the water and the minerals of the planet, belong to no one nation, but should be shared by all. Concept of sustainability and the care for the earth and its resources will be the center of any rebuilding effort. Of those who have an alignment with the soul, whether conscious of it or not, can find common ways of bringing higher vision and spiritual values to leaders, to the existing 10 or service groups, 10 seed or service groups, and their subordinates. This can be done by identifying those who represent the higher vision and values, make contact with them and support and uplift them in their work. Keep in mind that the service workers, that is us, New Group of World Servers, are all the hands and the feet of the hierarchy, and they represent an externalization of soul values. These members are the founders and the builders of the new civilization. They are doing it today with those thoughts and ideas, in addition to those people around the world who are representing the importance of right human relations, working out through all the seed and service groups. Looking back at the world order in the last 100+ years, there have been numerous examples of authoritarian and totalitarian inclinations, even from democracies. A new world order would not impose any standardized type of government upon the nations. There must be a steady and regulated disarmament of nations. No nation must be allowed to produce any weaponry for destructive purposes or infringe on the security of any other nation. Although a relative peace exists in most parts of the world, governments and nations still act separately and often unilaterally cause disruption and are upsetting possibilities for a lasting peace, such as what is on the verge of happening in Ukraine right now. A progressive foreign policy would be driven by the concept of uniting nations and not dividing them. Are there any comments or questions at this point?
No, there's none.
All
Nothing in
right.
chat, no hands.
Okay, I'll continue. I provided some ideas of what a new vision might look like, but who are the persons or people to carry it out? We might describe some of their characteristics of the visionary leader or the statesman. This person or persons would not be a savior, but a leader to point people or a group in the right direction. Esoterically, we can consider characteristics, demeanor, ray makeup, whether the person's a disciple or initiate. Maybe that doesn't matter. But in rays and initiations, according to DK, it depends on the monadic will effect upon the lower egoic individual self-will. This is especially true when the individual is on the path of discipleship. Here, the disciple is grasping and understanding the higher aspects of the mental processes, and egoic will begins to influence him. The statesman is a person who is experienced in the art of government or versed in administration and government affairs. It could also be a person who expresses great wisdom and the ability in directing the affairs of a government or for dealing with important public issues. Perhaps their spiritual development we can talk about. This person ideally would be beyond corruption. They would have integrity, that is, being aligned with the higher aspects of the soul and expressing that. They would have the ability to confront distortions of truth. We call it glamour in the esoteric world. In the outer world, with the trained observers, the people who work in the journalistic community, broadcast industry, we see them calling out lies and deception. When a leader's lower desire nature is transformed by the soul's will, he is driven by a higher motivation and impulse with his decisions. As a result, personal self-interest is superseded. Ideally, this would enable right human relations among all people and sees a community of nation as one with no separation. A statesman is a visionary leader, or a statesman or a visionary leader has the vision to see interconnectedness with other seed groups and how they can cooperate together for positive change. And this goes back to what I have been saying before, that in my mind, that the political organizers group is perhaps the most important seed group in today's world, because it brings together multiple seed groups together and how they interrelate and interconnect with each other. A statesman would have the ability for rallying people around a cause and creates a coherent group field of knowledge and wisdom. This person would ideally have perception of elements of the plan in enabling the individual to create the conditions in the minds and the hearts of people for working together with a common goal towards unity instead of separatively. This person could have the long-range scope and consideration of what could be transformed within society. Considering the whole spectrum of religious, economic, and political factions, it's not just hate and selfishness and separatism and narrow-mindedness that drive many people in their actions. Although this describes a highly evolved server, to have this level of awareness, this person must most likely be a senior disciple and have accomplished much soul integration and connection with the spiritual triad. In reality, there is probably some leaders in the world with some of those characteristics, but they are few and far between and not yet in a position to take leadership or effect wide-ranging change within society. In the last 80 years, basically since World War II, we have seen people such as Benazir Bhutto of Pakistan, Nelson Mandela, South Africa, Gorbachev of the Soviet Union, Golda Meir of Israel, and Churchill of England, Great Britain, who have had a positive transformative influence and a greater vision for their respective countries. In the 1980s, Gorbachev was the leader of the Soviet Union, and he saw his nation was suffering politically and economically at home and abroad from the continual waste of resources that were dedicated toward military expenditures and political ambitions. By seeing the larger picture, both domestically and internationally, and the political trajectory his nation was on, he changed the focus within his government and reallocated those resources toward a more useful, non-military and life-giving purposes. Their actions, his actions, were predicated on employing wisdom and seeing long-term big picture for the benefit of the group. Overall, the work of these visionary leaders emphasize statesmanship and rising above partisanship for representing the higher ideal dedicated to the welfare of its citizens. As evolutionary thinkers, they acknowledge the challenges facing humanity, but have their own inner sense of direction as they stand for core values and principles as they create recommendations for society. They help design and build organizations and institutions, all operating with ethical actions, representing a new type of leadership dedicated toward evolutionary thinking, leading to change in society. The current leadership model and mindset for industry or governments is linear in its approach and does not include all parties and situations. This new methodology will have a holistic and global mindset that is sustainable, multidimensional, which does not exclude any participants. That humanity should be built and evolve towards democratic, sustainable, and thriving organizations that will produce effective leaders. This is the goal. Through educational programs that are developing new methodologies, evolutionary leaders train people in a new leadership to create organizations based on partnership, cooperation, empowerment, collaboration, and shared inspiration. I know I'm saying a lot of things here, so if you wish, you can be able to hear this again, of course, on Makara. Are there any comments or questions at this point?
Still nothing.
All right. Crisis of perception. Since the early 20th century, humanity's been developing through all the seed groups. Although great scientific, economic, and political success has ensued, it has come at a great expense to humanity and the planet. Because our global problems are so acute, we have reached a crisis of perception. This is a phrase that the physicist Fritjof Capra defined in the 1980s, saying that we have many crises, but in reality, there's only one crisis. Our model, according to Capra, is that we are trying to apply concepts to an outdated world view. From an esoteric viewpoint, crises are intensified as influential spiritual energies. That is, or for example, from the seventh ray of synthesis, which comes into conflict with the sixth ray retrogressive materialism, and that mankind has not acknowledged this and resists change, the change that it brings. We now partly realize as individuals and as groups of nations that we are living systems existing within other systems and kingdoms, and thus influence each other. Our challenge is to learn how we can integrate cooperatively with other groups and share a common vision, and realize how our livingness connects with and influences other people and things. This relation can lead to a world unifying vision that embraces all peoples from all nations and cultures. A statesman, visionary leader would help people create a system of social values with solidarity with the economy that prioritizes the needs of people and community and not profits. The visionary leader understands the ideal of need for establishing harmony between all interested parties' needs in order to avoid conflict and create compromise and consensus. This can be done by changing laws, rules, and government, or through direct investments in a project. This is the foundation for creating and maintaining peace. Seed Group 1, the telepathic communicators, that is the think tanks, and Seed Group 2, the broadcast media, trained observers, they need to communicate this very concept. Our challenge is to learn how we can integrate cooperatively and other groups with other groups and the environment, and share a common vision and realize how our livingness connects with and influences other people and things. When I say livingness, I'm talking about the soul's radiance coming through us as we operate within the NGOs and do our service work. This can lead to a world unifying vision that embraces all peoples from all nations and cultures. The political organizers group seems best suited for creating a new vision for defining a foundation for a shared vision of humanity. Visionary leader fosters shared values of diversity and other commonalities with the community. The visionary leader, be it he or she, sees the community and the nation as one with no separation. He or she may speak of our nation, our world, our people with shared values and recognize that. All people would be seen as equal in origin and no group has power over another. The objective of the statesperson is to facilitate the establishing of right human relations with justice, universal rights, and opportunity for all through right education. This would create a new world order where people could also come to recognize that the natural resources of the planet belong to no one individual or nation and should be shared by all. With this awareness, it develops a sense of internationalism that would allow people to grasp world affairs and know how their actions affect the world. And this would extend to developing an awareness about the effects of climate change and a sense of responsibility about containing the spread of coronavirus. Spiritual tension. Behind the various crises of the world, there is, esoterically speaking, a spiritual tension emanating from Shambhala, but focused by hierarchy. This tension is communicated to virtually anybody who is open to impression and ask, what is this tension and how can it be a driver to be used for a positive change in the world? In Discipleship New Age, Volume 1, the Tibetan says, as long as man is focused in his personality, the point of spiritual tension of the soul will evade him. Spiritual tension is a result of a complete dedication of the personality to the service of humanity. And it stimulates and empowers, but does not evoke the lower life of the personal self toward higher a higher alignment to the ashram. GK also describes spiritual tension as the fixed, immovable will. We recall that the higher will, the highest will, comes from Shambhala and is stepped down by hierarchy to humanity. Initially, spiritual tension is held by the hierarchy and the soul. It is later realized by the disciple as coming from the spiritual triad, as he connects with it in meditation. With the influence of energies of the Atma and the Buddhi and the Manas, this provides a motivation towards service. The higher sense spiritual tension is registered as a thought form in the concrete mind. The individual knows and feels it in his consciousness, and it motivates the individual to action with purpose and intentionality. As much as the individual's personality is aligned with the soul, he becomes a powerful soul expression for enabling right individual and group relations. Around the world, peaceful protesters are responding to spiritual tension by trending towards self-determination and a repudiation of violence in favor of mediation and conflict resolution between governments and cultures. This can also be anyone who protests against aggression, social injustice, and governmental or corporate abuse. Spiritual livingness, in contrast to spiritual tension, is a very high level of soul expression and involves letting the vital life of the soul to freely move through the spiritual seeker's lower mental, emotional, and physical vehicles through all his activities. From this, the mental and emotional life of the individual is conditioned by impulse and illumination from the soul, thus making the mind aligned with right thinking and orientation. Examples of livingness: we see actions of the medical staff at hospitals and clinics who are treating COVID-19 patients, such as nurses, doctors, and those administering vaccinations, as they are practicing healing with harmlessness and compassion. Service workers and visionary leaders are acting as the hands and feet of hierarchy and are helping to illuminate humanity by helping uplift or helping mankind shift from a mindset of selfishness and separation toward the group and global consciousness of cooperation, goodwill, and unity. They're doing this by maintaining the thought forms, attention of meditation, conflict resolution, and building cooperation across all seed groups. This causes a shift in the social, religious, economic, scientific, and political spheres to help bring about the unfoldment of practicing right human relations. It is interesting to note that with the outpouring of light and love and the will to good from the service workers and their activities, that spiritual tension is coming from Shambhala and hierarchy, and it represents a near constant energy of friction in the political, social, cultural, and economic sectors of society. Friction here is represented in the form of an energy of how higher values of cooperation and goodwill are representing we can work it out together attitude. These energies or tension cause the invocation and evocation of new ideas and are helping to guide humanity in seeing the limitations of selfishness, greed, and bigotry and intolerance in all its manifestation, to create a new spiritually oriented civilization based on right spiritual relations. Are there any comments or questions at this point?
Still no hands and still no comments.
All right, we will continue. The power of thought and world events. This section is about how rhetoric as thought forms by people working in this seed group, the political organizers, influences people and world events. It almost goes without saying that words matter and how they are spoken and their intent. Behind their intent, it is the will of the personality that wants some action to happen. Let's first examine the nature of thought forms. A thought form is concentrated and materialized thought energy created in the mind, and it is made up of physical substance, physical or etheric substance. Once the thought form is constructed, the individual projects his will, motivation, and purpose behind making it a reality on the physical plane. So this moment right now, we can talk about President Putin of Russia, how he's using thought form energy and putting his will and intention out there, and President Biden of the United States, who is countering him, saying, if you go into Ukraine, there will be consequences. These are all thought form energies and all tensions and energies going back and forth. Thoughts are created by the everyday man, whose mind is largely concerned with emotional and physical planes, and whom seldom connects with the mental plane. Thoughts are the responsibility of public leaders in politics needs to be present with sole intent when expressing their thought through speeches and sound bites. These are all made up of words and thoughts. Recently, leaders in the social media platforms such as Facebook are not taking responsibility about the impact of thoughts on their website. Their concern is only about profits through advertising. Thus, destructive thought forms are allowed to influence the general public. Eventually, it will probably be up to the political organizers group to declare what is the responsibility of social media and broadcast media for influencing public's behavior, particularly in the hot button issues where violence can be the result. Yes, this would affect free speech. For this understanding, there's already a legal precedent. An individual can be prosecuted for yelling fire in a theater when there is no fire, or for inciting people to riot. So the esoteric concept of right thought form building. For the disciple who is soul motivated and connected, he determines which thoughts are appropriate for the situation or occasion. He knows to impose a higher rhythm of his thoughts or soul presence to awaken the power to think clearly and accurately. He knows to hold and vitalize the thought form in order to attain its spiritual objective and thus transform or influence conditions on the physical plane. Less advanced disciples prior to the probationary path create thoughts in combination with astral or desired tendencies, such as my nation or corporation is competing for power and resources. This person is largely making decisions from his emotional astral body. Later, after the disciple learns what responsible speech and action can be, he aligns his mind and thoughts with the soul as he is stimulated with impression. This allows his lower mind to be driven by the soul and thus become more mentally focused. The disciple understands a relationship between the lower mind and the higher mind must be cultivated. This would involve being sensitive to impression from the soul and concentrating on the actual building of the thought form. After the thought form is constructed, he will need to know how to send it out, perhaps through right communication and speech. And so he would also, of course, interact with the first seed group, perhaps with the think tanks, then with the broadcast media, with the trained observers, seed group 2. This person then would become a white magician in thought form building as his thoughts are consciously directed. To engage in right thought form building, the disciple leader must purify or put his or her lower desires aside to the point where clear seeing is not inhibited. Esoterically, this involves moving the energy of the second or fourth chakras up to the fifth chakra, or center, where right speech would be the result. Also seeing clearly with an opening third eye or the sixth chakra, this allows the disciple to ascertain higher vision and impulses. These impulses are emanating from the soul or from the Buddhic plane. Note, a seed idea or thought can be put out by an enlightened thinker. This thought could be picked up by seed group 1, the telepathic communicators, who would interpret it and shape it in how it could be presented to the public as new or perspective way of thinking on a given subject. Then the enlightened thinker might even be interviewed by the trained observers, seed group 2, in the broadcast media. An example of a thought form put out there was President Biden, when he ran for office, or when he was elected as president, he had a concept called Build Back Better. I'm trying to think of what President Obama also had too. He had a particular phrase also, that we are something like we are one, or we can, something like this. But it's the idea that the leaders have a quick little expression that brings and unifies people together in consciousness. We've seen examples of this getting the public on board for supporting climate change legislation or responding to COVID-19 crisis nationally and internationally. On the negative side, we've observed how at the end of World War II, the mean-spirited attitude, World War I, excuse me, the mean-spirited attitude of diplomatic efforts of Lloyd George and Clemenceau punished Germany and strongly contributed to the rise of Hitler and the coming of World War I. In today's world, Russia and China are both posturing and using mental and physical techniques and strategies to intimidate the world. This is a dangerous game of wrong thought form building. Any comments or questions?
No, still none.
All right. What the conclave of 2025 could portend for humanity. So what is a conclave? Conclave is a gathering of the masters on the higher planes where they determine humanity's progress for taking the next stage in its evolution. The conclave, just for a slight background, they meet once every century, and they've been meeting for at least the last 6 or 7 centuries in determining humanity's destiny for evolution. But is humanity ready to receive new impulses that will decide the patterns for the coming century and the methods that will be used to fulfill divine purpose? The conclave determines what is possible and needs to be done from hierarchical perspective. Each new impulse coming from the masters comes forth as the will to good, also from Shambhala, via the hierarchy, but manifests as crises for mankind. So the impulse is basically an energy that comes and stimulates humanity, step down from hierarchy, stimulates humanity. It comes as a thought form, and we see this as a friction or a tension that causes crisis. Crisis hastens certain realizations and integrations that the hierarchy has set in motion. Once the precipitation of a crisis is complete, there are those who will act on the impulse and become change agents to bring forth a new impetus outwardly to move the plan of evolution forward. At that time, the masters and the ashrams will give their full assistance to those who are seeking to aid humanity along correct lines. The good news is, here in the 21st century, the activity of humanity itself is for the first time concerned with the entire subject of right human relations and how to bring it about. This means that humanity is responding to the will of Shambhala. The Tibetan Dwell Kul said the hierarchy will meet in conclave next in 2025. That's just about three or so years, to discuss the next stage of evolution for humanity and the first stages of the externalization of the hierarchy and of the reappearance of the Christ, or the world teacher. Ageless wisdom teachings predict that these great harbingers will present humanity with a new understanding through an interaction and awakening of group consciousness. For this decision process, hierarchy also takes into account the influences of the rays, the planets, the constellations, under which a new century will unfold. Furthermore, they may take into account the influence of evil. From externalization of the hierarchy, GK comments, members of the hierarchy are not only sensitive to impression from the two other planetary centers, namely Shambhala and humanity, but they are acutely aware of the forces of evil which are fighting furiously against the externalization of the spiritual work. Hierarchical objectives to be worked out. Since the conclave of 1925, 97 years ago, the New Group World service groups, in cooperation with the hierarchy, have accomplished much, but hierarchy still has objectives that are still wanting to be worked out. For example, before the potencies of the coming Aquarian age can be effectively employed, humanity must break down all barriers of separativeness, isolation, and prejudice that are keeping men apart from each other. This is in reference to negating those ideologies that have forced or imposed their will on humanity by assertive governments and corporations, and has caused humanity to largely focus on all aspects of the form nature through misinformation. Esoterically, we call glamours. The New Group World servers or service workers bring forth the principle of sharing to the general population. They're helping to bring awareness that each nation must realize its responsibility and interrelationship, both politically and economically, in the sharing of resources and for creating a basis for inaugurating an era of peace and abundance for all. This is essentially a fourth-ray action of bringing order out of chaos. New Group World service workers are transmitters of living links of truth. And they are a bridge between hierarchy and humanity, and are raising the mental life of human consciousness of the average man and woman to a high functioning capacity and away from the current astral polarization. With this expanded awareness, a sense of internationalism is developed and allows people the ability to better grasp world affairs and their effects on them. For example, this can include an awareness about the effects of climate change, and even here in the present, information about the spread of coronavirus. And we can also say this expanded awareness of, or a sense of internationalism is brought to the public because we have a shortage of goods, because China is very strict about limiting coronavirus in their community. So therefore, a lot of factories have been shut down. Therefore, people cannot make the widgets that get shipped around the world. And so therefore, there's a supply shortage. So people become aware of an international connection with their lives. Human free will and the working out of the plan. Human free will has driven mankind's activities for thousands of years. History has shown us that even to this very day, that as man resists change, real spiritual progress can be slow in coming. In approaching the 2025 conclave and what it portends for humanity, we must ask the questions. Will man's free will continue to interfere with hierarchy's objectives and plans? And what if humanity has not responded well enough to hierarchical and shambhalic energies? The will coming from Shambhala or hierarchy is not deterred by the behavior of an individual. The will of man can temporarily deter the manifestation of the plan, but cannot affect its ultimate outcome. As disciples, we in the esoteric community and members of the New Group World servers indeed have directed our wills toward realizing the implementation of the plan and helping hierarchy in any way we can. We understand that hierarchy never interferes, but impulses and impresses ideas and possibilities to those who are sensitive on the inner planes. So what if humanity does not make serious changes in how it functions on the physical plane? GK suggests from externalization of the hierarchy that hierarchy might set in motion or initiate changes through types of crises. He gives 3 examples. 1, a stimulation of certain people to dynamic and phenomenal, this is a quote from externalization of the hierarchy. There could be a stimulation of certain people, presumably leaders, to dynamic and phenomenal action, or an emergence of inspired leadership that could be overshadowed by divinity and can accept divine purpose as a driving factor in conditioning world affairs. So we need leadership from what GK calls a band of conditioning souls, such as disciples and initiates already in the world. These are people who can lead humanity out of the crisis we are immersed in within governments, within the governmental, economic, scientific, educational, and to the cultural sectors. Another crisis could be a divine embodiment or a hierarchical influence. This could manifest as an approach to the mental or astral planes with accompanying thought forms and impressions. From Glamour World Problem, GK says that by entities such as the angel of the presence may make his nearness felt and inspire you to pass courageously through the fires of a burning ground. Now, to the hierarchy, the astral plane does not exist. But if you can imagine a master or an arhat just in consciousness approaching humanity, or approaching where humanity is dwelling on the lower 18 planes, as we so call it through the cosmic physical plane. If you can imagine this being, this master, is radiating this energy from that place, they're not necessarily influencing anyone directly. They could or could not be, but they're just radiating their presence. And this could be a major influence and cause shift and change. A third possible influence that GK talks about from externalization of the hierarchy is a divine intervention that could take the form of a cataclysmic happening in which would bring aggression to an end through destruction. We are already seeing ongoing problems in our world around climate change, such as an increase in volcanic activity, floods, forest fires in northern and southern hemispheres. We have the cataclysm of disease and pandemics. The coronavirus pandemic is global in scale and has already in many ways provided an impetus for helping to unify humanity by sharing resources, knowledge, and asking for cooperation from people during lockdowns or mask mandates. Obviously, there's lots of people who do not cooperate. They don't wear their masks, they don't wash their hands, they don't social distance. But a large amount of people are responding to this concept, and they're extending their consciousness to the fact that when they wear a mask or they do these things, they're doing it for themselves, for their family, but they're also doing it for other people too. So this thought form, this friction, this tension, this impulse is coming forth and affecting mankind in that way. Are there any comments or questions at this point?
No, still nothing.
Very good, let's move on. Problems of Humanity from Alice Bailey's book of the same name. One of Alice Bailey's last books was called Problems of Humanity, and she outlined 6 major problems in which humanity is contending or are contending and are still working toward resolving. These problems are so significant within society, within the nation, that each problem would ultimately be handled by the government level. on a governmental level by Seed Group 5, the political organizers, by experts from the fields of politics, education, psychology, finance, and religion. That is not by any single group. The problems at their core are preventing the plan from working out and allowing humanity to acknowledge its already existing unity and oneness. Of course, due to time, I will only briefly describe each problem and how each relates, and how members of the political organizers group can be the ones that drive this mechanism and understanding. Of course, for more detail and in-depth discussion on the problems of humanity, you can reference my book, The Subjective Influences Through the 10 Seed Groups. And you can also read Alice Bailey's book, Problems of Humanity. So let's briefly describe each of the 6 different problems of humanity that Alice Bailey described about 70 or 80 years ago. Problem of international unity. This is at its very heart a problem of separation and lack of cooperation. It is a problem of greed and control of power. With the ending of the Cold War, the problems of terrorism, ecological and economic abuse still abounds with us with no end in sight. Further, there is no particular vision for the 21st century except for the richest nations to consolidate more power amongst themselves and further squander the world's resources and maintaining a materialistic civilization. Accepting rogue nations into the world community, such as Iran, North Korea, and how Syria, Russia, and China continue to maintain an aggressive posture to their neighbors and cause instability and chaos. With the incoming 7th-ray energies of synergy, or the concept of working together, international unity will eventually be facilitated between groups or nations through practice, cooperation, and goodwill. Problem number 2, as I'm so noting or numbering them, problem of the children, is almost an entirely one of providing quality education for children in all countries. This is one of the primary missions of the United Nations that is related to bringing people out of poverty through education. While working with the educators, Seed Group, the political organizers function in enacting governmental policy. These two are put together as they are critically linked. From a sound education, the child will grow up as a citizen, not of their country or culture per se, but as a citizen of humanity, resulting in becoming truly representative of humanity's best values. Thus, the student, one who is educated, he will recognize his responsibility as an active member of the local or group community or world community. Note in December, when talking about the educators, Seed Group 4, I discussed the need for developing the child's character and being able to attend an esoteric school with curriculum. You can review that talk and the insights by going to Makara. The 3rd seed group is the problem of capital and labor and employment. This is a problem about how capitalism and other economic systems and materialism affect everybody in today's world, including sustainability and how they contribute to serious environmental problems, such as pollution and resource depletion around the world. With the government and business communities so interlinked worldwide, there are many issues around human relations. These include the power of corporations and how it treats people in the workplace, and how low wages, poor working conditions, issue of sexual harassment, and corporate reach and social media. The 4th problem that Alice Bailey talks about is the problem of churches and religion. It is a problem of churches and with world's religions is that they are not living up to the teachings of their founders, such as establishing brotherhood and sisterhood. Religion refers to man's relationships toward the subjective realms and his approach to deity for guidance and support. Major challenge of the world's religions today is to find a way to teach about the presence of God through immanence and transcendence, and of seeing God in all things. For esotericists, it's a problem of not acknowledging the subjective realms, where one becomes liberated through an understanding and approach to the higher self. And of course, next month, I'll be discussing these ideas with Seed Group 6, the religious workers. The fifth problem of humanity, the psychological rehabilitation or renewal of the nations. The issues here are similar to the problems of international unity, but with problems deep-seated and rooted in the historic past of racial, ethnic, and cultural conflicts for a given country. Under this heading, we are wrestling with national identity of all nations, with each nation must learn and come to establish an understanding and thinking of who they are individually and amongst the community of nations. From that understanding, they create objectives and determine what they can contribute to humanity as a whole. Each nation is driven by its own national identity, and this constitutes an ideal which colors their political, cultural, and economic life. The last problem of humanity that Alice Bailey spoke of from her book was the problem of racial minorities. And this probably represents the oldest of conflicts with which humanity as a whole must reconcile. On the face of it, the entire problem can be reduced down to the great sin of separativeness. Nowhere has the life-destroying effect of separativeness been more clearly shown than in the field of race and ethnic relations. Whenever or wherever it is found, racism creates or maintains deep and crippling lines of cleavage. The guidelines for right human relationships have been given by the enlightened teachers of the world in the simplest of terms, such as the Sermon on the Mount and the Eightfold Path. If we are to love one another, to practice right thoughts and deeds in words, then these spiritual principles provide a foundation of global cooperation, justice, security, and ultimately right human relations. Indeed, the summation of these problems is not for mankind to adopt the need for promoting and practicing goodwill and right human relations between individuals, groups, and nations. They alone would remedy much of the problems in the world that we're contending. Any comments or questions by anybody?
Yeah, Tia has her hand up.
Go ahead.
Hi, David. Great talk. I've been following you from the beginning.
Thank you. Yes.
And so I guess this is
Okay.
sort of a
I'm back,
build.
Mom.
I guess
Okay,
hello?
so next, that's what,
Okay. Can we have one person speaking at a time?
Okay. Yeah, so I guess this is a follow-up to, I guess, the whole thought process that has gone on before. I know you mentioned that the leader will probably be either directly under divine impression or an initiate as far as the new seed group would be concerned, because you're talking about a synthesis of consciousness with the first, second, and third rays, and at a time when you're shifting between in a first ray paradigm with seventh ray incoming energies. I mean, it just boggles the mind that anybody would be sort of this leader, except one that is directly part of an ashram or under some sort of divine impression. I mean, I don't even think that the philosopher king of the past that we thought of as the paradigm of a great leader would be appropriate in the new age. I mean, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, I can't even think of an example of any leader that I would say would fit into this sort of example that you're talking about.
Well, I could definitely go on for a while and talk about this, but I'll briefly say that in the United States, let's say in the House of Representatives and the Senate, we have people that represent certain political viewpoints. And we don't need to go specifically into what those are, but a certain viewpoint, these people can be very responsible people, and they could be acting on behalf of their own community. They could be spiritually inspired by what they think is right for their community or the people they're representing. Now that could be a certain level of understanding right there. Now, to the one I'm talking about right here is a person who is connected, who politically becomes a leader, a visionary leader, and this person would be, number one, they would be they'd be beyond corruption, they'd be transparent, they'd be accountable, and they would be working with ethics. It's like, yeah, where is this person? Well, persons, so leaders. They might exist, but they don't dare come into politics at this point because of the separatism that exists, et cetera, in my opinion. But the idea for the future, these people would already, to be able to even to say these things simply says, we must think of the world community. We must think of what's best for the nation. We must think of what's best for the world. Or, with the current crisis in Ukraine right now, President Biden is talking to Putin saying, hey, you do this. This is not what the world community wants to see happening. You're causing instability and you're causing great tension where it doesn't need to be there. So this is, I'm not saying that Biden is necessarily that visionary leader, but he's holding the concept of unity and higher consciousness. And what I'm talking about is a person, it's even beyond that. And you also understand that that when a person comes onto the probationary path, they're going through great purification in their consciousness, and they are admitted to the ashram at that point. They have no consciousness or awareness they're even part of anything at this point. They're just going through their tensions and crises, and so they're very separative in their own consciousness, no doubt. As they expand themselves, they open up their heart, the first initiation takes place, and they go out into the community and start helping people. As much as they expand their awareness even further, then they become greater involved in whatever seed group they're connected with. And hopefully we have people that really have expanded vision. I mean, we already have people like this that are doing this on, I believe I put the link in there for some of the groups. You'll have, I can't remember the exact name of the group, but there are visionary groups that are holding a higher political, social, and economic and cultural understanding about how humanity can function. There are groups like that, and I can provide the links for that later. But they're basically like think tanks, spiritual think tanks. Deepak Chopra is one of the people that's part of that. And the ideas of what the Dalai Lama is doing too. These people are holding these higher values, and people are saying, and they're looking to say, hey, I really agree with that. But where are the leaders to drive these higher thought forms? We don't have them yet. And why don't we have them? Well, I'm not sure exactly how to answer that, except for the fact we need to have, humanity needs to cry and to ask for that. We need to invoke those people, and we need to speak up to our leaders and say, we cannot accept corruption anymore. We cannot accept you being bought off by the gun industry or the arms industry, or that you're corrupt and being bought off by somebody from Wall Street or something. This is happening all the time. And it doesn't, not just for the United States, you see it in Israel, you see it in Germany, you see it throughout the EU and Asia, around the world, many places. So it's a problem across humanity. So as a result, we do not have leaders that see the entire group of humanity whole yet. And this will come. We are doing it, but at what cost? And when will this happen is the question. So I'm rambling here, I know, but it's like, I think I gave you a sense of what I see the vision is, at least. Next question.
That's it. No, nothing else.
Okay. So you see, much of what I'm talking about here, actually with all these seed groups and all these talks, it's basically It's an ideal of who we are as workers, service workers, who we are as New Group World servers, and who we are as spiritually impulsed and aware people. Now, we can be impulsed and contacted by our meditations to impulse to go out into the world and do things. This is great. And this is actually my greatest goal for these talks, is not just the intellectual and academic understanding about what the seed groups is about. That's extremely important too, yes, but it's the idea that we take the esoteric concepts and merge them with the outside world. And it is not an outside world. It is all one world. There's just multiple levels of our world that we work and live and have our being. So let me go on to the next slide here. Let's see. The ideal government. GK talked about an externalization of the hierarchy. Let it not be forgotten that the objective of all true governmental control is right synthesis, leading to right national and interior group activity. The problem resolves itself on the type of authority, with the problem and the methods which should be employed. The methods that GK is referring to is certain authoritarian measures are by enforced control, such as through the military. So we see this with Russia right at the moment. Basically, Putin is driving an authoritarian government with his military and wanting to go into Ukraine. From this would create either an oppressive condition within society or a system of cooperation willingly rendered by an intelligent majority. It has never yet been seen. So GK is basically saying that, yes, there can be different authoritative groups or, governments, and they do have a particular level of expression. And I'll get to this a little bit more shortly. But GK also said, we are moving towards such a condition of world consciousness and are on our way toward experimenting with it. When the political organizers are rendering change within government, they must consider what type of authority and means should be employed. Temperaments of people differ from race to race and country to country. For enacting change, a certain type of government may work in one country, but the same type of government will not work in another. If authoritative or enforced methods were carried out in one country, its particular type of population could respond positively. But using the same methods in another country could cause violence, as its people are resistant to a form being imposed. So in asking the question, what is the ideal government? The Tibetan suggests that the ideal government has yet to be created and implemented. GK lists 4 distinct types of government. 1, the government of an oligarchy of illumined minds. The illumined minds, or these illumined minds, would actually be highly educated service workers who are selected by massed thinkers, the general public, presumably, to rule. In this society, education would be highly valued, and their means of ruling would be through educating the public by teaching right understanding, discussion of ideas, and analysis. The use of physical force would not be considered. The Tibetan notes that the hierarchy would work closely with the scientists who factually recognize the reality of the soul and its use of force or forces. In essence, this connection would constitute a group of ruling occultists or esotericists. Again, these are just theoretical, or the ideal government has not been created. The second type of government that GK envisions is a government by a recognized spiritual hierarchy. Hierarchy will relate to the masses through service workers who will function as intermediaries between the ruling spiritual government and those who are oriented with right values, such as cooperation, goodwill, bringing people together in unity. This of course infers that the hierarchy and the Christ have externalized onto the earth. And at that time, thousands of service workers, probably millions actually, would be sensitive enough to sense their thoughts and ideas and help to carry that ideas out. Then there's also the government by a true democracy. This type of government is successful with a system of education to train people in recognizing higher values, higher ideals, working in the spirit of synthesis and cooperative unity. Cooperative unity is when the soul and the physical form are well integrated and working towards a common goal. A true democracy has yet to exist. Ambitious politicians, financiers, and lobbyists, whose motives are quite often selfish in intent and in practice, control democracies in today's world, regardless of what the voters say. Currently, it is this minority of rich, powerful individuals and corporate bodies that are calling the shots in the mainstream narrative. And they're imposing their wills upon the nation, their plan of distorted ideals and of their ideal world. GK said, when the world has people who are thinking and spiritually awakened, the political field will be purified. Education provides the key to developing the link between the legal system and government for teaching the higher ideals by leading thinkers. And I said back in December, when we talked about Seed Group 4, is that the ideal for the educator Seed Group 4, is to teach the youth, presumably from early age up until the university or whatever, that they have a concept of government, that they participate in that, and they have a concept of unity, and that community extends not just within their own immediate community, but extends to the nation, and their community extends to the entire world and embraces all cultures. So it is education to have a political awareness of international relations and international awareness too. The fourth type of government that GK talks about is the government by dictatorship. Here, the Tibetan lists 3 types of dictatorship. A dictatorial government is run by a person or persons who may or may not be an idealist, but rule with selfish motives and punitive rule. The method of this ruler would be to invoke fear in his people and control through the use of military force. Government by dictatorship can also be a monarchy, and this is usually limited by the will of the people. This is all incidentally coming from externalization of the hierarchy, roughly around page 51 if you're interested. There's more detail. I'm just summarizing. Government by dictatorship can also be a rule by a president. Under this type of government, this person is often idealistic. It's interesting to note the individual is subject to his own faulty human nature. This person works with the advice of his advisors and the potential for widespread selfishness and corruption. However, this type of dictatorship is basically good and guided by the national constitution, which provides a check on power and behavior. And we note that governments by dictatorship typically breeds fear and purges. And from this, it is interesting to note that the methods the dictator uses causes a rise in thinkers to become outspoken and espouse higher values, and results in a resistance movement, such as what you saw during World War II in France with the resistance movement. And it wasn't just in France, it was other places in Europe too. I see that there's a comment in the chat. What is the comment? Does anybody have a comment or question?
Yeah, just the question is the link for spiritual think tanks.
Okay,
that
I'll
you
have to get that to you at the end of this talk here. Did I hear somebody's voice in the background for a question also?
Did you hear what, David? Yeah, I was just repeating Karen's statement.
Okay, no problems. I'll continue here. Okay, moving on. Healing subjective relations between the nations and the need for moving on. In Raised Initiations, GK says, if the subjective relations between the nations are emphasized and the outer frictions and the objective disagreements are ignored, a great fusion of human interests can take place. In the war raging today between conflicting ideas, it is essential that this cleavage be made abundantly clear. Only the voice of a trained public opinion and the intelligent demand of the masses for right human relations can save the world from chaos. If this is so, then the duty of each individual disciple, man of goodwill and intelligent thinker, is also clear. If we look back on history's past rivalries and animosities between nations, we see that most of the nations reconciled and moved on to become fast friends. For example, France and England fought each other for centuries, for 1,000 years almost, even before they were even nations, in bloody feuds and wars. But now, for nearly 2 centuries, they work closely in cooperation on virtually all issues. England and the United States were bitter enemies, but now the closest of friends in all ways. The reconciliation of Germany with the rest of Europe. There are numerous examples throughout the world of reconciliation between nations. We could even say reconciliation of cultures too, which I'll get to shortly. These are examples of how the path to international peace can be achieved. However, in the world, there remains hotspots with serious conflicts between rival groups. Probably nowhere in the world is there a situation and condition more volatile than the Middle East. In that region, many countries maintain tensions over race, religion, and ethnicity, dating back thousands of years, representing flashpoints that could easily lead to war. The greatest diplomats and statesmen in the last hundreds of years have not resolved these conflicts. This is a remarkably complicated problem to resolve even for the hierarchy. The Blue Books link, according to GK, I haven't found it yet, but the GK, I remember reading a long time ago that GK said that the Middle East problem will not be resolved until the middle of the 21st century. And if anybody knows the link for that location, I would be very interested. It's possible that a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, like what happened in that was created in the 1990s after apartheid was abolished in South Africa, could possibly form a model for addressing major issues existing between ethnic groups and nations. In essence, this would allow witnesses, victims, perpetrators of past crimes and atrocities to air their grievances in a public forum. Most likely, this court-like scenario would be run by the United Nations and provide amnesty to all who testify. Perhaps this is naive to think this could succeed or even happen. Just for it to happen, there would have to be a minimum conditions to be met, such as the interested parties to truthfully come forth. So, for example, the problems in the Middle East, it would mean that the Arab nations would have to recognize Israel as a country and it has a right to exist. The same would hold true with the Shia and the Sunni factions of Islam, who would also have to cease all hostility toward each other. The ultimate result would allow all parties to coexist in peace and to release all present and past bitterness from the past. All people would look forward toward the region of peace. In this present state, it would undoubtedly take more than anybody in the international community can offer or credibly present. In the end, all parties must be accountable and responsible to whatever has happened. So if we're to have this brave new world, governments must become inclusive of all minorities, cultures, and genders, and be resilient to the needs of all. Otherwise, the system will break down and there will be chaos and we will all fail. Such is the challenge. Any comments or questions?
No, still none.
All right. We will continue here. Internationalism and globalization. From an indirect viewpoint, the political organizers group is dealing with international developments that are evolving and affect political realities on the ground. A more expansive and creative global reality is breaking free from colonial and historical influences with enormous implications for our collective future. Planetary political and economic development is evolving from diverse expressions of nationalisms to new configurations that are responding to and helping to shape and affect numerous aspects of our global future. From an economic viewpoint, fundamental legal protections of individual nations has generally gained growing acceptance, even though significant cultural variations and violations continue to exist. For example, the influence of Google in Europe and Asia. Progress has occurred in the field of medicine through the WHO, the World Health Organization, an agency of the UN. There is an increasing global cooperation in fighting disease, epidemics, and pandemics, health, especially in the underdeveloped nations. There is increasing progress in education globally that promotes gender equality and access to technology despite certain national and social issues. There is an acceleration of trade that has intensified the emergence of a global interdependent economy, albeit with mixed results and temporary stalls due to the pandemic. And I'll be talking more about these ideas when I cover the financial services group, see Group 9 in May. These new complexities challenge spiritually aligned spokespersons to bring wisdom to the fore for resolving our political, economic, and social challenges. Many developing nations or countries, for example, resist attempts to adapt to international perspective in recognition of scientific data about resource depletion, for example. For decades, we've been witnessing the destruction of the rainforest in Brazil and its effects and the impact on climate and ecosystems. In 2005, the UN Millennium Ecosystem Assessment concluded that human actions are depleting Earth's natural capital and putting such strain on the environment that the ability of the planet's ecosystems to sustain future generations can no longer be taken for granted. Although concurrently there is evidence that there is growing shift that is capable of altering the current trajectory, but will it be in time to avert looming catastrophes? On a more positive note, international social and economic development promotes expanding levels of education, information, travel, and other experiences that enhance human knowledge and experience and awareness and intelligence. Christian Welzel of the World Values Survey says, the cognitive mobilization inspires and empowers people to act with purpose, to think for themselves, rather than accept received authority and wisdom. And it motivates them to develop and to unfold and actualize their human potentials. At the local community level, with assistance from international groups, the concept of human rights has found expression through pro-democracy demonstrators in Arab countries, such as in Hong Kong, in Arab countries and in Hong Kong, albeit with resistance. This is a direct challenge to existing top-down strategies of authoritarian rulers. Regarding the power of youth in messaging the future. In her book, Power to Transform, Stephanie Pace Marshall points out that our children are eager to engage with us in re-imaging our collective future. We see this through individuals such as Greta Thunberg, a young Swedish protester who boldly confronts world leaders who are resisting political and economic measures for making significant change to mitigate climate change. Some, like Patricia Misch, call her the new abolitionist. Greta Thunberg tells leaders of the world at the UN's Climate Action Summit, you are failing us, but the young people are starting to understand your betrayal. The eyes of all future generations are upon you. And if you choose to fail us, I say I will never forgive you. Sounds like a very first-rate approach from her, what she's doing. She is just one of thousands of young people who are speaking up and protesting to the world's political leaders. World leaders are moved by Thunberg's candor and honesty, but so far little has changed in seriously addressing climate change or protecting the world's or the global environment. Methods for bringing peace into the world. Thoughts on the concept of what peace can mean. Dr. Louise Diamond, an international peace builder, wrote, "Peace is more than the absence of war. It is an active presence in society of a way of life that honors life. We need leaders who will address the root causes of terrorism, injustice, and oppression, not their symptoms. We need leaders who will put our prodigious resources toward establishing the conditions for peace at home and abroad. We need leaders who are willing to take responsibility for our own actions before pointing the blame to others. For establishing a global peace, Seed Group 5, the political organizers, must be at the forefront of societal change in creating a new system of governance where participants or leaders see all parts of the whole and situations as working with interconnectedness and interdependence with all nations and all seed groups functioning collaboratively together. Robert Mueller, the former secretary of the Economic and Social Council at the UN, said the development of many specialized agencies is akin to development of the global brain attempting to explore and understand every aspect of earthly existence and manage the complexity of global problems and opportunities. This type of work can strongly facilitate the manifestation of the plan for humanity, working out as a dynamic process, as a unifying force that will progress human evolution. We also need to move from the age of authoritarianism to a time when mankind can share in mutual freedom of thought, speech, and worship. We need to apply a first-rate wisdom for confronting dark thoughts and exposing evil, and denounce all forms of incendiary language, and deny anybody no airtime in social or public communication or networks who incite violence and terrorism and separatism. We need to, remember, we're thinking of the concept of bringing peace to the world. From this, we need to acknowledge the importance of arms control and international security. This is a term applied to create and restrict the international distribution and proliferation of conventional and nuclear arms around the world. It's addressing the concept of promoting the idea of the delegitimization of war and the need for controlling armaments worldwide. This also entails reallocating monies for military spending because in the long run, we realize it is unproductive and a waste of resources instead of for alternatives to spending monies of war and to promote security and peace and better relations between nations. Leaders in the seed group, the fifth seed group, should take steps toward world security, probably at the level of the United Nations through, though with confidence building steps to build structures within society that foster global cooperation, global policy, and development. This could possibly be in combination with the United Nations 2030 global sustainability goals. We need the political will among the most prominent and most influential nations, such as United Nations, China, between the United States, China, and Russia. In order for the externalization of the hierarchy and for the reappearance of the Christ to happen, GK says the principle of sharing and resources must be implemented. A measure of peace must be established based on educated goodwill, which leads to right human relations. This indicates the lines of light. The communication must exist between nations. Members of the Seed Group 5 political organizers group, promote the idea that everyday people can come together to discuss commonality between cultural and ethnic groups instead of what divides them. And I talked about this before with intercultural communication or citizen diplomacy. This has been happening since the 1950s. This is the people-to-people programs aimed at building better understanding across borders. It is the ideal that right relationship exists within each individual at the level of body, mind, and spirit. Here, the energy of synthesis can be used to foster mutual understanding overtly and subjectively toward all races and ethnic groups. Esoterically, this is working at bringing pairs of opposites into and towards a synthetic relationship. There is a need for defending human rights to be at the forefront of all international political and social engagement as an organized and continual global movement. And this will help break down all barriers of separation. Human rights need to be defended and offer solution to abuses. Seed Group 5 workers, political organizers need to offer solutions and promote cooperation and goodwill and reconciliation in every nation. There needs to be a use of religious networks. These are people who already have vision and values and are justice based. I'll be discussing this idea further when we get to the workers in the field of religion next month. If you're interested in this type of discussion and information, you can go to the Lucis Trust and the Lucis Trust / World Goodwill, and they're discussing these issues on a frequent basis. Are there any comments or questions?
Still no hands and no other comments.
Okay, my concluding remarks. What have the political organizers accomplished, or are they accomplishing? As was said earlier, the field of politics is perhaps the most important of all seed groups in current times, in that it is the center of so many concepts, ideas, and ideals about how society should be guided. For a majority of nations, the fields of education, science, healing, finance are deeply interconnected. At this point in our civilization, virtually none of the world leaders have a cohesive vision of how everybody can work together with common goals and cooperation. There are individuals, pundits, and think tanks that provide detailed viewpoints through books and essays on how one organization should be run, but it is largely one-sided in favor of a particular group or entity, which excludes the majority. It is interesting to note that there's a plethora of individuals who are generally inspired, often with spiritual inclinations, who are working to make societies around the world function and communicate better. They work through various levels of government to protect people's rights and protect the environment, who are also working to make whatever organization or situation work better for the community. But while people with good intentions are out in the community, working and making good things happen for the average citizen and the environment, they are constantly challenged by government regulations and political philosophies that seem politically to blow in the wind. For example, in the United States, environmental regulations are passed to protect the environment by a Democratic administration, such as imposing limits on the amount of coal that can be burned or the pollution that it gives out. But when a more conservative administration gets elected, then most of the work of the previous administration is undone and they are philosophically opposed. Hence, there is conflict and non-cooperation. For this type of work, skilled disciples or even initiates as spokespersons would be necessary to work on the inner and the outer planes to help all parties come from the soul level with understanding. Finally, as the seventh ray energy of Aquarius and synthesis is pouring into the world, its transformative energy of synthesis demands the end of the present cleavage and involves the principle of sharing and resources, and it is one of the essential conditions of the externalization and the reappearance. If we are wanting to establish harmony within society and emerge from the current chaos, then we must recognize the dynamic where harmonious forces seek to bring balance between the higher spiritual energies and the tensions of the lower 18 subplanes where the majority of humanity resides. Before the coming potencies of the Aquarian age can be effectively employed, humanity must break down all barriers of separativeness, isolation, and prejudice that are keeping men apart from each other. This is in reference to negating those ideologies that have been forced or imposed their will on humanity by assertive governments and corporations, and has caused humanity to largely focus on all aspects of the form nature through misinformation. Service workers are evoking ideas and higher spiritual values, such as cooperation and goodwill throughout the 10 seed groups, to the ideal of establishing right human relations in all sectors of human life. And they are helping to bring awareness that each nation must realize its responsibility and interrelationship, both politically and economically, in sharing the resources, and for creating a basis for inaugurating an era of peace and abundance for all. This is essentially fourth and seventh ray action for bringing order out of chaos. We understand that right leadership comes for those members of the Nuclear World Servers and all the seed groups who act on impression from their soul and from the hierarchy. They are invoking higher reasoning to remedy crises related to political, social, and economic upheavals. Thought form activity requires them to clear away anything that blocks this type of spiritual viewpoint. Right leadership involves truth telling with regards to science and the pandemic, and right allocation of resources to help communities, the economy, and the nation. I will close with a quote from Dino 1, Discipleship New Age, Volume 1, with the Tibetan saying, "We know that this is the hour of humanity's greatest opportunity. And if men can pass triumphantly through this, and by the strength of their own souls, surmount this, the very present evil, then the evolution of the soul or the evolution of humanity will be hastened beyond all that was believed possible. It will constitute a release, self-achieved and self-initiated. And this means as much as the life of mankind as it means to the life of the individual disciple." Thank you, and thank you for listening. Any comments or insights or questions?
Yeah, Tia again.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about this, and I know Michael Robbins always talks about humanity is now taking the first initiation, and that we'll know that humanity has taken it when we see the reappearance of the Christ, or it will portend the reappearance of the Christ. But for the expansions of consciousness necessary for the types of things that we've been talking about in this seed group, I mean, I'm very grateful. I would think that humanity may need to take the second initiation, and it would be a good thing that the Christ would be here when all of that happens. I mean, what are your thoughts about that? Because, we definitely have to have some traversing of that area between the astral body and the mental body for some of this leadership and expansion to take place in consciousness, for these types of groups to externalize and not just be purely internal.
Yes, that's I agree with what you're saying, but you have to understand that in today's world there are 7.8 billion, that's B of a billion, souls in incarnation right now, and every single one of them are clamoring for food security and a way of life that allows them to continue to live. but there are all sorts of people in the world that are opposed to that. And there's all sorts of people that want to support them to do that. And this is the energies in the world at which are vying for the world stage right now. And the fact that we understand this, and the fact that we see these ideas, these spiritual viewpoints and ideas that are emerging of unity and bringing people together in cooperation and negotiation and conflict resolution. There's still plenty of tensions in the world, obviously. Look what's happening with Russia and Ukraine right at the moment. That is, I would say the first initiation has not happened yet, of course, because yes, we are still going through the purification, as you noted, but it's we have to have people, we have to have spokespersons, visionary leaders come forth to espouse these higher ideals of cooperation and goodwill and bringing people together and not excluding people because of their color of their skin or because of their racial identity or something. This unfortunately is happening still here in the United States. We still have great prejudice and bigotry, unfortunately. But yet there's people that are countering that thought form too. So this is what I was talking about before, how the light is countering the darkness, and they're creating tremendous friction in the world right now. And which is a very interesting dynamic, although very, very difficult to feel and to live with in the world, if you're sensitive to that. As far as, there's another comment too, that's another GK, I don't remember where this quote is from, but GK said that there's roughly at some point 60% of the souls available for incarnation. This is souls in incarnation and souls that are in pralaya or waiting for incarnation. They are the ones who will work on the path of evolution and move forward with humanity, or help humanity move forward. That's 60%. So guess what? There's 40% that are involutionary and that are holding humanity back. These are the forces of evil. These are the forces of materialism. These are the forces that do not want humanity to move forward. And so these are the dramatic forces that are working. We see this happening on the outer planes. We see this in the news. We see it in the print media. We see spokespersons and pundits talking about this stuff back and forth. But yet the real war is happening on the inner planes, and it's been going on for hundreds or thousands of years already. And with the approach of the masters, their approach, when I talk about approach, they're getting closer toward the lower planes, as we see lower planes, as where we have our life and have our being, the majority of humanity does. Just the energy of their thoughts and their energies, their light, their concepts of life, love, and bringing forth the concept of working together in unity and brotherhood. That whole radiance is coming forth of the plan, and that is influencing humanity too. Those are all coming through impression, and the new group of world servers, people that are sensitive to impression, are picking this up. And they don't even have to be conscious of the fact they're picking it up. Says, oh, I just got this idea. And so they start writing an essay, they get interviewed on CNN or something, or they write an essay, or they write a book, and then they start talking about this. And it's a new thought form that comes into the world. So this is happening ongoing and constantly. And in my mind, the only way that we're going to really make a change for the better is if we have spokespersons who are beyond corruption, that are transparent and are accountable to a higher ideal, that these people come forward and that they become the people that become our spokespersons for humanity, for all the seed groups, not just for the political organizers. They come forward for the educators, for people in finance, people in the healing scenario, people in the broadcast media, et cetera, and scientists. So this is the major goal that we as the new group of world servers, the service group, we are working toward helping make that happen as the hands and feet of hierarchy. I hope that answered your question. Are there any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I don't know if Catherine says, thank you, David. My first class with you is so interesting. And I don't know if, yeah, I think that's what I was going to do. Tia. Okay, Tia.
I mean, I agree with you, David. I think that with the incoming intuition of the Aquarian age, it's great, and we're already experiencing that now. I guess my concern and what I was talking about and alluding to the discussion of the or the differences.
You're dropping out, Tia. Could you speak
I
up,
guess,
please?
I guess
Thank you.
my concern or my inference to the second initiation is what we're seeing now, which is with rightly what you said about the incoming energies of the Christ and hierarchy, and how it's really stimulating the astral body of humanity right now. And we're all kind of caught up in this confluence of erratic, chaotic energy all over the place. And one of the things that I think is, and it's so important that no group is an island. We're going to need every seed group to be doing its part. The telepathic, communicators, trained observers. I mean, they're going to have to be putting out thought forms to the leadership. I mean, all sorts of things are going to have to work in synergy. And I mean, that in my mind can only happen with an externalized hierarchy training us and guiding people as to what they need to do.
I completely agree with that. It's just, I often think about what is the trigger point for the hierarchy and the Christ to quote, have their bodies a manifestation and externalize and reappear. I don't know what that trigger point is. Are we going to have dramatic destruction and chaos and bringing everything down to a collapse before we finally realize somebody says, this is not the best way for living, for conducting ourselves? So are we going to have to do that? I certainly hope not. I'm hoping that we can, that we have the wherewithal and the wisdom to, on the international level to see the writing on the wall that destruction is not the best way to go, and that we can rebuild what we have. But we have to have cooperation at the highest levels of the international community, the highest levels of the existing outer plane seed groups, all those different fields which you just mentioned also. So there has to be that level of cooperation. Otherwise, we really can't proceed with transformation, the higher transformation. And because remember that the seed groups, the kernel of spiritual understanding exists at the ashramic level, and that would be probably at the highest mental plane, or somewhere in the Buddhic plane where the ashrams exist, where we can tap into theoretically, or if you are so aligned, that is. So it's, I don't know how to answer beyond that. It's just simply, we just have to hold the ideal and radiate from a soul level that things are working out, and that cooperation and goodwill and unity and brotherhood are possible and are happening, and counter the darkness wherever we possibly can with goodness, with the energies of good. I recommend not confronting evil directly. That would be, I think that would be too challenging, but at least at a master level, that would be for us very difficult. But for, just radiating our light outward, letting the soul flow through us, radiating outwards through livingness. And I believe that can be a major contribution toward healing.
Did you have more follow-up for that, Tia? You can unmute yourself if you do.
No, I'm good. Thank you, David. Thank you.
Hey, no
Michael.
problems, Tia. Thanks for your interest. Michael, and to everybody else, I will also, I'll be putting together an email, a brief email, and I'll send it to Michael Crow so he can post it on the website of the different groups that are working in bringing spiritual think tanks, bringing those forth into the world right now. I'll put that together, and Michael will post that as a separate word file in along with the today's PowerPoint, which will be posted also. Michael, the PowerPoint I have here also is, it's slightly updated from the one I sent a week ago. So if you could, I'll send this one to you in about a little bit later. You'll get that.
Yep, no problem.
Okay. Anybody else with any comments or questions or anything?
Just some thank yous. Other than that, nothing else.
Okay. Next month, as I said, that I will be talking about Seed Group 6, the religious workers group, and we'll go from there. And I believe that's going to be on March 12, I believe, which is 4 weeks from today. And just check into your website, excuse me, to the Tennessee Group's website. That'll give you that information.
It's March 12th. Yep. That's the next one, March 12th,
Yeah,
8
okay.
p.m.
Great.
GMT.
Yep. Okay, well, thank you everybody for sharing and for participating and listening. And let's go from here and hold the highest light possible for making things and ideas of the soul come forth. Thanks, and I'll see you next month. And Michael, I'll get that to you a little bit later.
Right on, brother.
Okay, take care, everyone.
Okay.